Let's cite the deep magic to me, which I was there when it was written. What are the best examples of this that you know of? Story 1. My coworker, Jim, was delivering products to a company we work with often. The guy at the other company was complaining about the products and insisting Jim had made mistakes. He then pulls out a manual he had and starts walking Jim through it, explaining everything he did wrong. The manual was a step-by-step guide to the variety of products, complete with drawings and a bunch of pictures of a young man with a working on the parts. Jim finally stops the guy, points to one of the pictures and says, "Do you see that name tag on this guy? Jim? I am Jim. I wrote this manual 20 years ago." Story 2. My kids know I'm a gamer, but I trend towards RPGs. A decade ago, my oldest was really into this new game he and his friends got for the Xbox, Street Fighter V. He had a bunch of friends over, and they were doing the usual mid-teens trash-talking, competitive one-upmanship when I came home from work. "Hey, Dad, we're having a tournament. You want to play? What game? Street Fighter? Yeah, I think I've heard of it." As in, yeah, I played in SFII arcade tournaments back in the early 90s on a daily basis. I wasn't godlike, but I could hold my own with said godlike players most times. He and his friends proceed to bet me that if I win, they'll mow the yard and do yard work for a week. If I lose, I have to buy them pizza. You know what, kids? There's a lot of characters. Why don't you pick one for me? Oh, 6 attack buttons? Nah, I'll just use one. I'm old and my RSI is acting up. Which one do I use? Oh, okay, this is the jab? All right. I proceeded to annihilate each and every one of them. Didn't matter which character or which single button I was allowed to use. Bye-itch. I've got that frame data tattooed in my DNA. Now go get on my lawn. It's been a standing tradition over the years for my kids to introduce their new friends to Dad by seeing if anyone can beat my Street Fighter one-button blind character pick Kung Fu. Still undefeated. Edit. It's gratifying and awesome that this resonated with so many people, and I've loved reading your own deep lore stories. Story 3. I was training a new file clerk at my firm, and I was explaining the system we have for checking out physical files, and that we have asset tags with scannable barcodes that you have to scan after your ID badge to log who took the file and is ultimately responsible for it. She turns to me and says, "God, whoever came up with this is a retentive nightmare and all you need is a sign-out sheet." I just kind of stood there, because I developed this system after years of having to dig through attorneys' offices and hunt down important stuff because they ignored the sign-out sheet that was there when I got hired. Sigh. Story 4. When my 19-year-old colleague started discussing this new film franchise he'd found to me, 41F, and explained it used to be a TV show on something called MTV. The franchise he was talking about was IRL. There was that job offer, asking for 5 years of experience. In some programming language, one of the creators of said language was refused the job because he only had 5 years experience in the language because it was only 5 years old. Edit corrected timeframes to match reality, unlike HR recruiters. Story 5. When my 13-year-old cousin asked if I even knew what a meme was. Like, look here, you little, I've been on the internet since Newgrounds. Don't you dare talk to me about memes. Story 6. My teenaged kid, in 2005-ish, telling us I just found this cool new band. Sweet. Who? The Red Hot Chili Peppers. They just put out their first album. Boy, you were probably conceived to RHCP. Story 7. I hadn't played Magic the Gathering for decades and asked a friend's kid to teach me the new rules no interrupts now, including Commander. He gave me a simple control deck. I looked at my first hand and my old brain creaked awake. This card lets me draw an extra card every turn for 1 life, and I have 40 life? My old brain whispered card advantage to me, and I proceeded to lock down the table. I was the head judge for the French National Championship in 1994 and judged the semi-final of the first World Championships. I was the first LVL3 judge in Europe and worked for WotC UK from 1993-1998. I was literally there when the deep magic was written. Story 8. When I was in grad school, I wrote a Wikipedia article on a species I was co-authoring a paper on. I also did a class project in genetics on the same species, which wasn't related to the publication. I got fine marks on the class paper, but the professor chided me for not describing all the interesting things known about the species for background. He told me I could start by just reading the Wikipedia article. Story 9. My teenage son turned on Eminem in the car thinking it wasn't my style, and I wouldn't pay attention, and instead, I rapped along to every word of it. Then I told him if I ever heard him call a woman literally anything Eminem just said in the lyrics of that song, he was grounded until he turned 18. Story 10. I have to write employee accomplishment documents to move them forward in their career. They have to go before a HR review board, who decides if the document is written properly and justifies the change, a raise, and more vodka for the staff member. I've been doing this for years so I can crank out these documents in my sleep. A new HR person joined the company and started kicking back my documents for arbitrary bullshit, not enough content, too much irrelevant information, needs more insight, etc. After the third time one of my documents got kicked back, the reviewer emailed me an example of what she considered a well-written employee accomplishment document with the names redacted. I emailed her back. Thanks for sending me this example, it helps a lot. Since I wrote this example 3 years ago, is it okay if I just fill in the current staff's name? Story 11. I was talking to an old Navy vet, like closing in on 100 WW2 old, and my lil 13-year-old starts nerding out about Iowa-class battleships. He proceeds to get out a box full of manuals, reports, and various memorabilia. Turns out he was actually on the USS Iowa from her trials until the end of the war. Story 12. Last year, my wife's boss, who is new, got mad at her for misapplying a policy that doesn't come up much, but is very important. After trying to explain it several times and getting nowhere, she finally said, "Look, this policy has been in place a lot longer than you've been here. I wrote the policy. I trained everyone on it. If you want to change it, fine, but this is what the policy says." Story 13. Back when I was a high school teacher, my buddy and I put on an extra life event overnight at the library. The kids put Halo CE up on a projector. I walked in and asked to play, and they said they'd take it easy on me. It was Slayer on Hang 'em High, and we called it at 25-8 between the three of them. Story 14. I'm in my 30s. Last fall, my 21-year-old coworker asked me if I had seen the new Christian Girl fall outfit inspos on TikTok. I pulled up my Instagram outfit pics from 2010. It was so funny to see her face when I showed her that leggings, knee-high boots, and circle scarves are not a new thing just because TikTok discovered it recently, lol. Story 15. I cited the deep magic. I was probably about 8 at the time. I had just learned how to play chess. My father was getting a degree in comp sci, and we were visiting his uni supervisor. There was a chessboard, so I explained the rules of chess to his supervisor. His supervisor was some level of grandmaster and was actively designing a computer program that took on and tied Garry Kasparov ERC. He later solved checkers and chess ERC. He was very good-natured about it and absolutely waxed 8-year-old me in chess. Story 16. I'm a 37-year-old millennial, but I have some Gen Z coworkers ages 19-23 who were shocked. I knew about memes, and I knew what Wojak and Pepes are. I'm like, dude, I literally grew up on 4chan. I am UNC. Story 17. I had a work meeting regarding a specific internet-based phone system. I was on the pilot team that tested it when it rolled out. When I got to the meeting, I introduced myself as a system expert to the guy next to me. He just kind of grinned, but didn't say anything to that. I asked him what his role was for the meeting. "Oh, I was the lead designer for the system," was his response. We both took it well and laughed about it. Story 18. I work in software. I had a client during a meeting where they were beating up on my company's stress with absolute confidence that our software couldn't do some given thing. I gently let him know that it did do that. He literally shouted that it did not. He knows this software. He's been using it for the past 3 years and it has never done the thing. I immediately hit share on my screen, showed him the setting that turns it on the setting whose name and description I wrote 8 years ago, turned it on, and clicked through all the buttons that I had personally designed in the given release in 2016 or whatever it was, and asked him if he had any questions. He did not unmute his microphone. Story 19. My younger coworkers try to talk about anime to me like I wasn't passing around bad bootleg VHS tapes with my friends in high school to get my hands on more than just Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z. Story 20. When my younger cousin was in his M16 and I Know Everything era, he kept bragging about some old bands he rediscovered. One of them was the Beatles. Talked about how influential they are, all the music they had that barely anyone knew about, and how he knew so much more about them than anyone in his uncultured family. Unfortunately for his ego, me and the rest of the family he was lecturing had been living in Liverpool for nearly 2 decades by that point. Story 21. Let's just say I'm an IT professional who got his first computer at the turn of the 80s. Son gets a new gaming computer and wigs out because he can't get Minecraft Java Edition to work. I suggested he needed to install the Java runtime environment, only to get snottily told that Java is write once run anywhere, and that wasn't the problem. He ended up having a meltdown. When he eventually calmed down, I put the JRE on and it ran. Story 22. For me, it was happening upon a video game booth at a South Florida flea market about 15 years ago. 2 early teen boys were playing GoldenEye multiplayer. I stopped to watch for a bit before the owner offered up a third controller. The 2 kids grinned and stage whispered plans to gang up in me. What they weren't ready for was my 06 playing to run literal circles around them, firing the entire time, shooting ammo crates away from their initial start points, and my detailed knowledge of the layout of the stacks. After the 10th kill, they both just gave up and left. Story 23. My nephew. With all the condescension of a 6-year-old, there's this movie. You probably haven't heard of it. It's called Aladdin. Me, did you wake me up? Did you rub my lamp? I happened to be in the US in fall of '93 when Aladdin came out on tape. Story 24. My son's friends. 1819 tried to explain to me 46, who sang the sweater song. I dusted off my CD collection, and their eyes lit up like Indiana Jones finding the Holy Grail. Story 25 kid, who was probably about 19-20, explaining to me that the Star Wars prequels were universally beloved when they were first released, and people only realized they were cringy when they started getting memed in the 2010s. I saw all of those movies multiple times in the theater. I participated in so much bashing of Jar Jar and Padme, hanging out brushing her hair and Anakin's terrible line deliveries. It was all over pop culture at the time too. Nothing I said would convince this kid. He just kept saying no. Everyone loved them when they were first released. Story 26. I honestly don't know if this fits the question perfectly. Years ago, I was in the mall in Elizabeth City, NC, in one of the corner stores, and the Eurythmics song Sweet Dreams was being piped over the store's sound system. I overheard a couple teenagers near me loudly saying, "What the man? They stole this from Maryland." Story 27. A few years back, my stepdaughter was super excited to show her mom and I this awesome new song she had found. Song in question, Black Hole Sun. She was shocked we knew it. Story 28. A few years ago, my wife and I started a small nonprofit that focuses on getting businesses to incentivize beach cleanups. Fill a container with trash from the beach and exchange it for a free ice cream cone, bar if surf wax, coffee, etc. The initial concept took off and it grew a ton. We're not so involved these days, but we still keep tabs on the team and the initiative. They were having an event at a brewery and we went to go check it out. While in line for beers, the woman in front of me had one of our shirts on. I made a comment about how cool it was that there was a good turnout. She agreed and talked about how she got involved, which turned into her talking about how she connected with the org, which turned into her explaining the origins of the organization to me. She wasn't patronizing or anything, just kind of on a roll and kept going. Anyway, she wrapped up and asked how I first came to know about the organization. I told her I probably first came to know about the organization as I sat at my kitchen table creating it. She was like, "Wait, what? This is your thing? Really? Did I just tell you your own story?" She was a little embarrassed, but it was super funny. She handled it well and we couldn't have done it without passionate volunteers, so no shade at all. We passed the organization over to the Surfrider Foundation a few years ago, which they took on as one of their flagship environmental stewardship programs, the Better Beach Alliance. Story 29. A personal one. I use data that you have to buy from a specific agency that is essential to my industry. Had a guy come in from that agency trying to tell me I was using it wrong. I've been using that data longer than he's been alive. Turns out, I wasn't using it wrong. Story 30. I had a young molecular biologist say to me once, "Can you imagine what it was like doing this stuff before PCR was invented?" I had to break it to him that I not only remembered that time, I spent a very long day as for the who invented it. The kid looked at me as if I told him I remembered when the wheel was invented. Story 31. One of the QA guys at the factory I work at was out sick, so I got sent in to help out for the day. The remaining QA person insisted on training me and took something like 5 minutes explaining what inspection points to look at before he took a breath. Just enough time for me to say, "You know him, the one who wrote the QA book, right?" Story 32. Had a service running at work. Someone said something like, "We don't want to mess with that service. It was written before any of us got here, and no one knows how it works." Raise his hand. I wrote that. I still have the code. It's probably due for a rewrite anyway. Story 33. Don't tell me that your computer takes forever to boot up or that your internet connection is slow. I grew up with a computer that took 5 to 7 minutes to boot up and screamed at you while it was doing so. And if someone needed the phone, you had no internet because they were connected to the same thing. Story 34. I bet grandma never took your phone away. I was born in '74. I didn't see my first mobile phone until my late teens, and it was a 20-will-B brick with a shoulder strap. Story 35. Loyal drinking with some young locals at a bar in Dublin. I'm an older American last year. The band played I'm Gonna Be 500 Miles, and I sang every word. They told me I was the GOAT and asked how I knew that song. The 80s were my formative music years. My good dudes. Edit. I was in Dublin last year for the Flaga college football game. Story 36. I went to Shakey's Pizza, where a local, very large and social BBS meet every Saturday. There was a kid there with a Battletech 2, the Crescent Hawks Revenge Manual. It was a really thick booklet because it had the stats of all the mechs. Him and his friends were flipping through the pages discussing the various stats when I walked up and asked what they were doing. This kid never liked me. He gave me some dismissive answer as I took the book from his hands and flipped through the pages. I stopped on a page in the very back, pointed to one of the people on the development team, and said something like, "Who's that idiot?" It was a picture of me. Story 37. I run a small business. I was struggling and lost a key employee, made a call for help, and brought my dad in on the business. We shall call him Steve. Steve is still part of the team now, about 2 years later. He has 3 people reporting to him, and he runs a tight ship. One of his team members came to me the other day. I don't know if you know this, but working for Steve can be hard. He is very demanding and sets extremely high expectations. You sweet summer child, would you like to go back in time and meet my 15-year-old self? Story 38. I went into a meeting at work about some kind of problem our software development team was having, and a somewhat new young cocky developer started explaining what the problem was, how things are supposed to work, etc. I'm the most senior person in the room, but not a software developer per se, as I'm more of a people and project manager at that point. He starts describing the system our software interfaces with and says something not quite right about it. I try to very gently correct him, going out of my way to avoid saying you're wrong and keep the story explanation coming. He responds kind of dismissively and briskly explains why I'm wrong. I now start to see his misunderstanding is important to the issue he's having. I say a little more strongly that I'm pretty sure that system behaves like this and expects you to do that, and he cuts me off. This time, he's a little more condescending and brushes off my input as he confidently pulls out a big document about that system. I guess to show me he's done his homework. I recognize this document. I'm very familiar with it, though most in the room are probably not. I respond by saying, I think if you look at this part of that document, you'll see. He cuts me off, tells me he knows what it says and how it is supposed to work. Then I ask him if he knows who wrote that manual. He does not. Someone else in the room that knew me better asks if I wrote it. I say yes. In fact, I didn't just create that document. I also designed the whole system and wrote all the software that was the subject of that manual. This was done 5 to 7 years earlier when I was in a completely different party of the company. We continued on with the meeting and it gradually became clear to him and everyone that his misunderstanding of my old system and how his software was supposed to work with it was the core part of the problem he was having, and it ended up being a productive meeting. If something has been in place that long and it's called from 1,000 different places, maybe don't assume it is the problem. I think he gained a little respect and humbleness toward us all that day. Story 39. My teenager cousin, I am 8 years older, starting to go out at 17, 18, telling me I should drink lightly and be careful with shots cause I can't handle how they drink. I have the good guy reputation in my family. Story 40. My best friends. 10-year-old daughter, who always seemed a little afraid of me, approached me a while back and said, in the shyest of voices, my dad said you like WWE. She's now my wrestling buddy. We've been to 3 live shows and are going to a Raw SmackDown dual show next month. Story 41. My dad explaining how to peel a hard-boiled egg to my mother. Both were in their 70s at the time. Mom had been cooking since she was 14 years old. Neither of them had dementia. She about cracked that egg on his head for that epic instance of mansplaining. Story 42. I'm a lobbyist. I and an elderly colleague were in a meeting with congressional committee staff. We were having a spirited discussion about what a provision of a decades-old law actually meant. I was doing most of the arguing on our side. Eventually, I directly informed the staffer that this was not a debate and that we were correct. When she asked me how I could possibly have that level of certainty, I turned the conversation over to my colleague. I got to watch as he informed her, as I already knew, that he was sure about the provision because he wrote it when he was a staffer for that very committee in 1962. Delicious. Story 43. Friends teen telling we're old, uncool, etc. as we pull up old music videos on YouTube. Whines for a chance to pick a video. Chooses video with clickbait title. You won't believe what happens during this solo. Gets all smarmy, crowing about how we might have thought we were cool. But even way back then, these were the cool guys. I says, OMG. Teen's mom. That's you. Mom pulls out photo album of Polaroids. Sure enough, different angle of 16 yo mom out crowd surfing on a boogie board being pissed on by Green Day. Oh yeah, your dad took that pic. That's how they met. Hunted the down to get the photo. Kid died a little inside. Actually went outside to avoid the cackle. Story 44. When my cousin showed me this great song Smells Like Teen Spirit. Or when people wax on about 2010 internet. I was there for the BBS and Style project. Story 45. A student, 18 in 2022, telling me I'm wrong about how dial-up work. Later in the year, they'd also tell me I mispronounced MySpace. Like a computer mouse at speed. This student hadn't read the material or seen MySpace written. They often leaped to how great their idea is. Story 46. My daughter told me that I didn't know anything about anime because I didn't know anything about One Piece or Attack on Titan. I started telling her about Fist of the North Star and Maison Ikoku and Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and then I literally told her not to cite the deep magic to me. Story 47. A friend of mine is from a less privileged part of Dublin and went on to study theater and Russian in the very prestigious, especially if you ask them, Trinity College. In one of her theater classes, she put forward an opinion on Chekhov, and a posh student promptly disagreed, and pretty heavily implied that someone from that part of Dublin probably didn't know much about theater. So my friend cheerfully quoted the original text in perfect Russian. Story 48. Was hanging out with kids at a county fair. Told a kid I could make his hand smell like strawberries by scratching it. When he put it up to his face to smell, I slapped his own hand gently into his face. For the next 30 minutes, he pulled the prank on others and it spread like wildfire. Eventually, a little girl comes up to me and says, "I can make your hand smell like strawberries." So of course I went along with it. Instead of bringing my hand in front of my face to smell, I held it under my chin and sniffed before saying, "Wow, it worked." The little girl was confused and pulled my hand to her face to smell, which is when I slapped it with my other hand. She never saw it coming, lol. Story 49. When Gen Z kids start talking about Nirvana to my 41-year-old, I mean, I'm happy they appreciate the music I loved growing up. I'm not judging, but there's just no way they could have the same relationship with it as someone who was there when it first hit the radio waves, and the sort of obsession I had with the first bands I liked as I was discovering music around age 11 or 12. I listened to some of those albums literally hundreds of times. Music was a lot harder come by back then, so you worked with what you had. Story 50. I teach stuff for a living, have done for 20 years. For 15 years before that, I did the stuff that I teach about. I still do. But I did then too. So AI is a thing in education these days. Well, know your enemy and all that, so I signed up and apropos of nothing, asked ChatGPT to generate a 12-week undergraduate lesson plan on a certain topic, with a brief content synopsis of each week. A certain topic I've taught for 20 years, which includes publishing lesson plans and presentations on the net, which I know for a fact have been copied into various study aid sites over the years. It's not like rocket science, but I am an expert, and some of my teaching is pretty unique and contains original insights and content. ChatGPT returns a lesson plan that is about 80 my own material, with my own syntax and unique, or at least idiosyncratic schedule, specifics, etc. etc. Da yum. Story 51. Brought in an old gaming PC to teach 8th graders Kerbal Space Program. When kids start asking about the specs in games, I ask the kids their age, and then inform them that this PC has been playing games longer than they have been alive. I only bring it to the school because it is expendable. Story 52. Watched a young signature collector outside Trader Joe's harassing a local politician who he clearly did not recognize. He was saying how the vote was illegal, and it should have gone to the people and the people hadn't gotten to vote on it. The politician said yes. I agree, that's why I voted no. The young guy keeps saying no, nobody got to vote on it, only the politicians. And the politician kept saying, I got to vote on it, and I voted no. I happen to know who the guy was, and it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. He had voted no because it was illegal and should have gone to the people. He clearly knew a lot more about the bill than this guy who was trying to collect signatures, and he also knew who had voted on it. Just a minimum understanding of the fact that the vote had happened in a building so close we could see it, and who our local politicians were, could have saved this young man from being an absolute. I don't think there were any other witnesses other than me and the poor politician. Happened now, I would pull out my phone and then everyone could watch the stupidity. Story 53. When my nephew was trying to explain to me how to play Mario Kart, pretty sure I quoted that exact line to him. He was confident he could beat me because the only people he's played against are the younger cousins and my wife, a non-gamer. Wiped the floor with him, taught him a valuable lesson that day. Story 54. My 20-year-old son sent me a songs to listen to a few years ago. Awesome song, Dad. Not sure if you've heard of the Deftones, but they're awesome. I was mad, sad, happy, and frustrated all at the same time. Story 55. Lol, not me, but one of my best friends, she grew up in the 80s and was big into arcades, Magic the Gathering, D&D, Nintendo, Sega, all that jazz. She and her wife actually own every single NES game ever made. She is now a high school teacher and hosts a tabletop club where she regularly has students preach to her about Pokemon and Magic cards, and was once even asked if she had ever seen a PS1 in real life. Story 56. I saw Star Wars in 1977 when it came out. I was 18, and am that rare thing a female fan of the saga. I have seen every SW production since then, read the books, the graphic novels, own them, and a great deal of memorabilia, including Gasp and R2-D2 cookie jar and its original box. I've lived in that galaxy for decades. I can't tell you how many times some little male fan has asked me, who shot first? Subtext. Prove to me you're a real fan, you crone. Honey, I saw the foundation as it was friggin' laid down in a big old theater with 2 huge projectors that illuminated those celluloid frames onto the screen by a gas candle. I was there to witness no memorabilia being available to buy for months because Lucas didn't order any. I lived through the whole science fiction published books. Fans loathe Star Wars, Star Trek movie media fans because those aren't real science fiction. And don't you dare call it sci-fi war. The better question would be, why did Han shoot first? Amateurs. Story 57. Cliché because of all the memes, but my little brother got into Call of Duty recently. He's only 13, but still is active in VC. So imagine my surprise one day when he comes to me controller in hand, crying because he got destroyed in a 1v1 he called for and was bullied by the other player. I, as the older brother of course, Decide that the person who made my little brother cry in a COD game needs to be taught a lesson in humility. Proceeded to pull an OG stump play on him and demolish him the entire time for 3 games straight. All the while my little brother is next to me screaming and shouting like he won the Halloween lottery. One of the best memories I have with him. He'll always cherish that moment. Story 58. I recently put in a support ticket at my company because something wasn't processing correctly. They came back to me and, while ignoring the thing not processing, said that we don't need to worry about that thing not processing because my team was supposed to do something else while quoting an article. My article that I wrote had to reply back that this article isn't relevant to the ticket and what we actually needed and why. Got a more streamlined answer back. Story 59. My nephew asked me to play the latest Smash Bros with him. I wasn't gonna bust out the real brutality because he was 10. Then he started bragging and said, "You know, I'm really good at Smash." Oh yeah? Guess I will bust out Jigglypuff and teach you what resting is after all, kid. Story 60. I millennial teach middle school, and recently I was chatting to one of my students about music. He told me smugly, "Yeah, there's this band I like, but you probably haven't heard of them. They're called the Weezers." Story 61. My wife and I were hanging out with her younger siblings. They mentioned that all the high school kids had started a new trend about tricking other kids to click on an old music video link. Rickrolling. They were talking about rickrolling. Our age gap is less than 10 years. And they were in high school, so it was more of a, "How is this the first time you've heard of this?" sort of reaction. Story 62. I once amazed some younger coworkers on my insane touch typing skills. It was brought up because I absolutely hate those clacking keyboards where it makes a loud noise for every key. I type so fast that it would give me a headache. No way. People only type like 80 WPM. It's not that bad. I grew up on Instant Messenger and AOM. Forums too. Typing was my whole day during the summer. They gave me one of those keyboards and I knocked out a paragraph they gave me to type. On a 20 WPM, adjusted to 118 WPM for accuracy. They gave me a harder one, lots of Q, X, Z letters, and made sure I didn't look down. 115 WPM. After 15 minutes, they couldn't stand my typing noise anymore. The sad thing is, I probably could have gotten a little better, but it was a new keyboard. My nephew tried to challenge me at old school MK. He decided that old school games were garbage afterwards. Come back in 30 years, scrub. Story 63. When I first started working as a dev, I was explaining how a particular data flow worked to one of our account managers. Later, while I was editing the query, I see said account manager's name in the comments log section. Dude used to be a dev before he moved to sales and literally wrote the first version of the thing I was explaining to him. To his credit, he just thanked me and let me work on it and deliver the changes. Pure class act. Story 64. When I was in college in the late 90s, I took a class in astrophysics for fun. The professor was extremely arrogant and often talked over the top about his educational background and experiences. One of my fellow students, can't recall his name, was an older, retired gentleman who was taking the class for fun as part of a program where seniors, over the age of 65, could audit classes that interested them at no charge. At the time, NASA had a program where they would loan collections of items related to space exploration, memorabilia, and moon rocks to universities. One of our lessons was on the items, and we spoke heavily about the moon landings, specifically Aldrin. The professor spoke on things about the mission, the rocket, the lander, etc. And my fellow student began to say to him that some of the things that he was saying was not accurate. They argued back and forth for several minutes on different topics, mainly involving the technical aspects of the mission, until finally, the professor asked why my fellow student was so adamant about these things, and his response was, "Because I'm the one that designed it," or something along those lines. We all just looked at him and the professor, not really sure about what was going to be said next. And before the professor could even say anything, my fellow student pulled out the textbook and opened to a page that had a picture of Aldrin and a series of the engineers and ground crew from Johnson Space Center. Sure enough, standing right there was the guy from my class. He had been an engineer for NASA for years. He was retired at that point and decided just to take the class to see what was new. It was great. Story. 65 little sister started talking to me about true crime like she'd discovered it. Had to bring her into the world of forensic files and cold case, like girl. Story 66. Collecting my kid from a park where a group of teens were hanging out and one of them annoyingly playing music from their phone, politely turned it down and apologized that AC/DC might not be to my taste. My kid smirked and knew. Next time I went to collect her from a gathering at this kid's house, same kid had his guitar attached to a tiny little portable amplifier and said, "Do you play? I used to do a bit. Here, would you like to try?" I finger-tapped thunderstruck. 5 weeks later, and I think he has a crush on me instead of my daughter. Story 67. My students swear a lot in class. I tell them to stop. They say I wouldn't last 10 seconds in a toxic co-D lobby, and I turn slowly to look at them. My generation were the reason co-D lobbies were toxic. I'm telling you to stop because you couldn't handle my fire.